trying to spark some interest in international issues, and that seems to be the hardest at this point. So, but we're live streaming the program. We'll be posting it periodically.
all day.
No.
Yeah.
It's hard, man.
I'll holler at you. Maybe do something.
Are you gonna go out to dinner with us?
I guess everybody's good. Okay. It really kind of isn't the way to move forward. All right, so welcome everybody to our forum tonight. We are going to be talking, this is the Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality International Forum on Zimbabwe. My name is Anna Edwards. I'm chair of the Defenders Sacred Ground Project. This is the kind of thing that actually the Defenders got started doing. We used to do public forums. It was always on either a local issue or an international issue with historical context and with the opportunity to get information to help us understand basically how an international issue might actually affect us here at home, but also how what we do here in the United States affects people around the world. So we're really pleased that this is the second of the forums in this series. The first one was an overview. This is the first one with a featured speaker. We're really pleased to have Netfa Freeman here to share his experiences and his thoughts on what's happening. But first I want to pass the mic to Phil Waledo of the Defenders, who's going to give you a little bit of an overview of what's going to happen.
Well, thank you to the hundreds of people who have gathered here tonight for this program. It shows a sharp increase in consciousness on the need to pay attention to international issues. Actually, the reason why we started this series of monthly forums is because we're very concerned that particularly younger activists have grown up literally always knowing nothing but war and not knowing a strong anti-war movement. And unfortunately, that's largely because during the Obama years, people were inclined not to be so critical of the first black president, who was under tremendous and disgusting racist attack every day of his 2 terms in office. And so naturally there was a tendency to not pile on. But as a result of the foreign policy, which is virtually the same under every president, every administration, both major parties, went on and expanded U.S. military presence throughout the Middle East and North Africa with devastating results for the people. We're trying our best to reach out and interest some of the younger activists in the important domestic struggles that we have to struggle against, both the wars abroad as well as those at home. We have a section in our newspaper, the Virginia Defender, on international and anti-war issues. We have initiated this monthly forum. The first one did have a speaker, but it was me, so I understand why Anna, who is my wife as well as my comrade, did not consider that to be a featured speaker. But we did have a presentation, an overview of the U.S. military around the world and the effect that the constant endless wars have on us here at home, as well as the effects that they have in the tremendous number of deaths and mass suffering abroad. Tonight we have Netfa Freeman from the Institute of Policy Studies in Washington, D.C., who will be speaking on the role of the U.S. government in trying to subvert the country of Zimbabwe, which went through such a long liberation struggle. Reverend Hunter. For those who may not know Reverend Hunter, Reverend Rodney Hunter is the pastor of Wesley Memorial United Methodist Church. And we're so grateful for allowing you to be here today. Would you like to say a few words? Would anybody like coffee? Okay. Thank you, Reverend. We can get Reverend Hunter to talk sometime. He's a tremendous speaker, which I got a chance to hear at your program just last week. Reverend Hunter is also the president of the Richmond chapter of SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And this room was filled with union members who were supportive and affiliated with that chapter. The next meeting that we're going to be having, they're on the first Monday of the month, will be on Honduras, which is not going to be an official part of our presentations, but we're going to find a place to show this on May 5th, which is the 200th anniversary of old Carl's birthday. And Raoul Peck said he did that film specifically to try to interest younger activists in principles of socialism. So that should be interesting. And I should mention that its role in providing a space for social justice activities, social justice movements, as well as Reverend Hunter's role as an activist, a member of the Defenders who passed in January, and our good friend Bridge Allen, a strong supporter of the Shockoe Bottom struggle, who also passed in January. So we'd like to invite you to join us. It's going to be a celebration. And
local issues in the DMV, how do we realize Pan-Africanism and the goals of Pan-Africanism? What does it mean to be a Pan-Africanist and be in the United States, and particularly be in the D.C. metropolitan Virginia area? And so we're trying to make that, a reality. Our main campaign right now is community control over the police. To get right into this, and kind of also to piggyback on a couple of things that Phil said in his presentation in terms of like talked about Obama and how things changed. He said because he had to do certain things as president of the United States, and that's something I also talk about, and it says a prerequisite to be a president of the United States. So we can't have too many expectations. It's not about who it is; it's the job. A prerequisite, and this might sound kind of harsh for some people. a prerequisite for the job is you got to be able to bomb babies in other countries. I mean, you can't be the president of the United States and not be willing to do that. This is like an unspoken kind of thing. That's how the duopoly, the two parties have locked it up, have made sure they're the ones. And if you can't do those two things, which means you have to be beholden to multinational finance capital interests and imperialism and all that, you just got to be that. And until we can understand that, sometimes we will always be hoodwinked in some way by the machinations of U.S. imperialism. Secondly, if we're real about it, there's a whole bunch of hypocrisy. Who the heck is the United States to tell people about free and fair elections and human rights abuses and all that kind of stuff? But if we're not real, we'll think the United States is a bastion of democracy and justice, and there's nothing that other countries doesn't have. Things that happen in other countries don't happen in the United States. But I think I'm preaching to the choir here when it comes to that. Now, this is just I'm going to try to be more that are in that agreement that Zimbabwe had to deal with. And mind you, this was, I think, like Phil said, this is a struggle, long bit of struggle. It was war, it was armed struggle. The frontline states in Africa, I think all of them had to deal with armed struggle in terms of getting their independence and trying to get some liberation. And so people were tired of that agreement. Zimbabwe could only reclaim land, because we call it reclaiming land, from white farmers on a willing seller, willing buyer basis. And I didn't mention that it was mostly an agricultural production economy that did a lot of export of goods. Willing seller, willing buyer, willing seller basis. Now, obviously, if you got a society or a country with largely poor African people, it's not going to be a whole lot of people able to buy. And then if you have some pretty, insistent white settlers who are not going to be willing to sell, then that's really doesn't make room for a whole lot of a redistribution of land. When land is reclaimed, prompt and adequate compensation must be paid in foreign currency. And then white settlers are guaranteed 20 out of 100 seats in the new parliamentary government. The ridiculousness of that should be evident in terms of them being minority and the parliamentary government, the disproportionate, it was to safeguard their power as a minority population. And then, so, I'm just going, I don't know how much of these slides will really help me when I'm going through. So anyway, we had these historical injustices. The people struggled against them. There were several intensifications of the liberation struggle that Zimbabweans referred to as the Chimarangas. And then in the last one, in 2000, now this is important. You know what, I didn't start with what I wanted to start with, kind of asking people to throw out, ask people a question. If you were to think about, because I don't know how much people want to know or how much people already know or what specific things people want to know, if you were to just kind of call out to me or to all of us some very concise, I guess, either stereotypes or things that you know about, that you've heard about Zimbabwe. Don't worry about whether you agree or don't, just what you've heard, and don't worry about thinking that you are supporting something that's not this, some propaganda or anything. Just what kind of things have you heard that that are kind of general things that don't make the country or the struggle look good, particularly in the last 20 years. Anybody?
That one of the things I've heard a lot is that the blacks taking back the land are not going to know how to manage it.
Good. Anyone else?
And the former president was a problem.
President of the problem, Mugabe. Okay, we can go with that if anybody is going to assume people just don't have anything, or not that you're shy. If you're shy, then you should.
Could you say something about what Zimbabwe was like under British rule?
let's go with that. So I'm going to try to work those things into we can just speed through this. So let me see if I can. All right, we'll stop at that slide right now. Now, one of the things that always accompanies sanctions is actually even part of how they do sanctions in a country is that they will, because like one of the things is and you report Anna pointed out is the black mismanagement of the land. So when they started talking about first, there was some redistribution of land between 1980 and 1990. Just a little, there was some, but it was not nearly adequate enough. There was at least I would think 30,000 families or 30,000 people farms that were redistributed to African people during that time. And around 1990, the Soviet Union had problems and dismantled. All the countries that were on the progressive left, independent countries trying to chart their own path tended to be looking to the Soviet Union for relationships, economic, everything. A lot of people don't know that when that happened, how many people have ever heard about the book by oh gosh, I can't remember his name, but the book was called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Yeah. And I can't remember his name, but anyway, if you checked out that book, Perkins, John Perkins, yeah. And so anyway, they used to take people, Asians or whoever, and disperse them. It was really economic order, bringing that into the fold of that, and they use aid to do so. And then also, along with that aid, the strings attached are called economic structural adjustment programs. So they make countries lower their tariffs or whatever. They make them lower the wages for their workers, make them bring in foreign investment, all kind of things that they impose on them in doing that. And so that's what Zimbabwe ended up doing. They took a loan from the IMF and World Bank in 1990. In between, to go back to, I'm sorry, this might be a little jumbled. Under Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia was what Zimbabwe was called before it got its independence in 1980. And Phil's question was apartheid system. It was like apartheid South Africa. All these racist laws and widespread poverty among black people. All kind of this is pretty much what it was. And brutal enforcement of this order, this political and economic order by police and by everything. And so when from 1980 to 1990, in between that time, Zimbabwe was actually able to realize an astounding amount of growth and progress in the fields of healthcare and the fields of education. In fact, even now, they still have the highest literacy rate on the continent of Africa, which is 80%, in between 80 and 90%, which is really high anywhere. And so they were able to make all these progresses. They pretty much established socialism. They were on their way to establishing a socialism, but all that had to be rolled back when they took this IMF and World Bank loan. So from 1990 until 1999, the country, it just was, things were just tension, and people were, not satisfied with the country and all those kind of things. And then toward the end, around 1998, the late 90s, the veterans of the War and Liberation were, they had been promised redistribution of land, just like everything. It was part of the agreement. And so they were dissatisfied with the slowness of the progress of that. And that's when you start seeing what they were called the land invasions. Where they were just taking land from people. It got violent, some people got killed. The media largely blames this on the ruling party, ZANU-PF and Mugabe. But this was just like a movement that just kind of started, and that's what they ended up doing. It was actually the intervention of the ZANU-PF, which at that time was the merger of ZAPU and ZANU, that established the fast-track line. They said, okay, we're not going to be bound by having to recompensate these farmers, and we're going to start redistributing this land fast-track. So that was actually an intervention of what was happening. It's the opposite of how they portrayed it in the media. And then once they started doing that, well, you can imagine that U.S. imperialism you can't do things can't be acting sovereignty, and you can't be giving justice to your people. That's when the demonization of Mugabe and ZANU-PF really begins, and they're saying, oh, he's a dictator, all these kind of things, in spite of the fact that they're having elections, and they having elections, though, also under the conditions of international interference in their elections. Really serious international interference. This is like, what they accuse Russia of doing in this country, but they're really interfering. They're actually creating parties. Like, for example, the Movement for Democratic Change, which is the main opposition party in the country, is really pretty much a product, or a product of Western imperialism through the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions. They end up funding that and then encouraging some of them, particularly this person who actually just passed away recently, Morgan Tsvangirai, who was the leader of that organization, to break away and start, and they gave them money to do it and everything, this organization, a political organization, to run against ZANU-PF. And they have other parties there. They have a parliamentary system. So the notion, when the United States or the Western countries call a place a dictator, they don't deal with the political structure or the electoral process or anything. They just blanket it, and people don't think critically about how do they make decisions there. What happens? They just run with the accusation of the characterization. And so now, if people could argue, well, individuals who have disproportionate say or influence or whatever, that makes it this. Well, I mean, when we get into that, then you have to really analyze everything like that. In this country, we might not be able to say an individual, but surely the rich. This is a dictatorship of the rich and the elite, because we don't have any say in that. So, there's really no moral ground to stand on it. It's actually also largely not true. They just spin out things. In 2008, and I could just mention this real quickly, they were calling the elections in 2008 fraudulent before they even took place. So they were actually, putting out all this propaganda and information. And when anyone who was paying attention on the ground, like we were, really looking at information, was seeing that it wasn't ZANU-PF that was manipulating and doing things, but actually MDC and the United States were meddling in the outcome of what they called the harmonized elections, where they had elections for both the presidency and the parliament and the localities and everything at that time. This was, under a whole almost a decade of destabilization by the West through sanctions. In the sanctions, and this is where I was going before, in it is not just stipulations for how to deal with a country economically. It doesn't just, and it does do this, but it's not only that it disrupts a country's ability to trade or to engage with other countries economically. They also put stipulations in the sanctions that allow the U.S. to fund quote-unquote opposition groups, fund media, what they call independent media in a country, and then they will allow them to, of course, you're not going to give this money to people. If you're imperialism, you're not going to give this money to people who are going to come and start some media and expose imperialism. You're going to give it to people who are serving your interests, and that's what they do. And along with what's out through agencies like the U.S. Agency for International Development, the U.S. agency, through what is a non-governmental agency that gets all of its money from Congress, the National Endowment for Democracy, and Britain has also counterparts of these doing my thing. So this was about the sanctions. Here's the fathers of the sanctions, Jesse Helms and Bill Fist. And this is a little bit about the sanctions. The sanctions that were established in 2001, international financial institutions are to oppose and vote against any extent. This is the power of the United States to tell what other countries are going to do in terms of a particular country. Oppose and vote against any extension of loan credit or guarantee to the government of Zimbabwe, and vote against any reduction or cancellation of debt. This is their power inside the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The laws authorize President Bush to fund opposition media organizations in Zimbabwe. The U.S. has joined, at the time, Britain and Western European officials in ensuring the near total cutoff of foreign currency flowing into Zimbabwe, and crippling blow for any nation that has to import. I mean, this is what they also had to import. Zimbabwe is a landlocked country and has to import oil and electricity and power. So that was really... Now, a lot of people don't realize, we have to think, the blow for the international economy is heavily dependent on the Western and the value of the U.S. dollar in particular. And so when you take the ability of countries to be able to have access to U.S. dollars, you're severely crippling them. Now, what they used to like to say is that the Zimbabwe, and they do this all the time, the sanctions they do are targeted sanctions. The missiles they send are smart bombs. They always want to make us believe that what they do is not really, against this, everyone. But they do it in a way that only affects the bad people in those countries. But that's just a farce. So anyway, this just goes into how the sanctions also affected the effectiveness of the land reform. So one of the things that Anna mentioned was this, and they always accompany the things that are happening with media propaganda. So in other words, if you say, the black farmers, they won't know how to do this, they need the white farmers to teach them to farm, they couldn't do it. Now obviously black people are doing the work, and they're, you have people who are supervised maybe or own the stuff, but they were claiming that people didn't know how to do this. And so if you put sanctions in the way, and this is like a classics for any country that's under sanctions, we have to understand the role of propaganda versus the destabilization methods they use. They will create the conditions in a country and look and point to the conditions they see. They don't know what they're doing, or this is messed up, or they have to, if the country goes and does something like takes some type of legal action or some type of action against the people who are running around giving propaganda in the guise of some kind of media, they'll say, look, they're cracking down on media. These are the kind of things you got to watch out for when they do in these countries, and this is exactly what they did in Zimbabwe. And in fact, Zimbabwe, I don't remember, they had individual incidents where someone would report something, totally out of the box, or they do something, and then but they never, I don't remember a time, and I actually just some Venezuela stuff, so I'm mixing up, trying to keep the things separated in my head, because they do this, this is how they operate in countries, you can almost get mixed up. And so where they shut down the media place. When I went there, and I wasn't too surprised because I know how imperialism works, but I'm going there and I'm hearing all this stuff about crackdown on the media. They got all kind of opposition papers everywhere, and all over in the street people are selling them. I mean, like the papers that I know are opposition papers that are created and funded by the Western imperialism are just freely in the streets, being all over the place. People are, and so when they're telling people that, if you don't go to the country and find out, you don't know that this is hogwash, And then this is just kind of this is kind of for people who maybe not as progressive. We're trying to show the contradiction. Where's the North American Economic Recovery Democracy Recovery Act? Anyway, so this is Chester Crocker, who was at the time the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, and he made this statement in testimony to senators, to appointing senators, and this was back then when I made the thing, but since then he's actually made some other kind of statement acknowledging that these things worked. These things. It says the second option, and I speak very candidly, is to work through all appropriate channels for a change in power in Zimbabwe. So if we were to decide to try and work for change in power in Zimbabwe, I would hope that we would have the wisdom to be discreet, to be low-key, and to avoid giving those in power the excuse that foreigners are out to get them. I mean, this is kind of weird because he's trying to act like, well, it's an excuse, but yet you're admitting you are out to get them at the same time. So, but people need to know these are the kind of discussions that are happening around people who really have power and have plans, but we don't really get that. We get what the New York Times and CNN and all them tell us. And so later on, and I might get to this, in the recent change of power after this happened, just before it happens, I think same guy Chester Crocker, there was a WikiLeaks cable that got released, because this was before WikiLeaks, when that made this thing, where he's actually saying, this is working, it's taking effect. We have reason to believe it's coming to fruition. Just be patient. And this is just before we're talking about 2014, I think. This is talking about the 2008 elections. I was just naming a couple things. I'll give people a chance to. I want to skip through this real quick, but give people, if you want to if you want me to go back or want me to clarify something, please don't hesitate to stop me in the middle. I don't need to finish everything I'm saying for you. Now this, I'm kind of ambivalent about making this assertion. Is to cooperate with each other to overthrow settler colonialism and liberation. They end up having a Southern African Development Community Conference, I think it was something like that. And out of that came the establishment of SADC, which actually establishes now. And so, and it's largely like a united front of countries dealing with economic issues and trying to work with large economic issues. There's other such formations and regional formations. That's what they are. They're regional formations in Africa. And there's some kind of official name for regional formations that I can't remember. Regional economic something, REC. So anyway, but because of the progressive and I would say liberal revolutionary origins of SADC in 1998, in this 1999-98, right around the time when Zimbabwe decided they're going to take back their land, they also, and each country, and the heads of country take turns chairing SADC. At the time, Zimbabwe was the chair of SADC, and Mugabe in particular was chairing SADC, and the U.S. was backing, and still backs, countries like Rwanda and Uganda, and they were destabilizing, actually sending in military incursions into destabilizing the border of the Congo. And the Congo asked for, and Congo is a member of SADC, asked for help. And this is the history of SADC. Can't go too much into it, but they have a very good progressive history of trying to do things for good, being a stabilizing effect in the region. And they asked for help in stabilizing this border. And they did it. There was some disagreement in SADC in terms of whether they would use negotiations or military influence, and the position of like Namibia, of the three, Namibia, Angola, and Zimbabwe, was that we're going to do both. We need to stabilize this border, and they did it, and they were successful in stabilizing the border. Since then, a whole lot of other stuff has happened. The same President Laurent Kabila is just all in bed with the United States, allies and everything. But anyway, one of the things that it's actually even in the sanctions bill, was the United States was trying to say that Zimbabwe didn't have the right to help. And here you are all the way in some other continent, and you trying to tell, we ain't even gotten to the history of Pan-Africanism, how countries really need to be cooperating anyway, and they don't need to be in that. But it's in the sanctions bill that's one of the things, and that they have to refrain from is their activities in the Congo, and all the propaganda has been they were only there to steal diamonds and all kind of stuff like that they put out there. Now this is a Daily Mirror online. I think actually it doesn't exist anymore. It folded quite some time ago, and it was one of the really independent media outlets that wasn't created by my Imperialism, and was obviously not proves that in the Zimbabwe Herald, which is the national paper and is established by ZANU-PF, the ruling party, they made it seem like they only have one, they don't allow. Well, this proves that they had another one, and also this particular story proves in the is that one of the reasons that the ZANU-PF in 2008 really didn't win is because they were split, and they just were not having a whole lot of support. And so this is before the elections, and this is MDC people acknowledging that they just were, they were poorly organized and just didn't, And they also were just advocating they had neoliberal type policy, bring in foreign investment, all this kind of stuff, just shamelessly, anti the sovereignty of the country. Now this is passed away. And he not just passed away. When did he pass away? It's been a little while now, actually. I don't know, 5 years ago, or maybe more than that, a little longer than that. So anyway, this is a statement he made that's kind of pretty. He wasn't talking about Zimbabwe, but he mentions it in passing, and just kind of let you understand at the time why this particular strategy that the United States has has developed over time and refined over time of the soft power and actually using. Does he mention in here? Well, they actually even use the trade unions, the AFI. I don't step on anybody's toes seriously into the trade unionism. I think labor unions are good and important and everything, but anything can be co-opted. And so the AFL-CIO has a branch or what you want to call an extension called the Solidarity Center. And the Solidarity Center, not only funded by the AFL-CIO itself, but also by the State Department and whatnot, and they're supposed to be their international wing and how they work with other unions around the world. And they were firmly entrenched in Zimbabwe, helping the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions, and they would like stage things. I mean, they would do these things that really, when it comes to, they would always be most acute and pronounced when it came to denouncing countries of when there was a country that was in the crosshairs, openly in the crosshairs of U.S. imperialism. It was like, really, you just, staging propaganda and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, this is Philip Agee stuff. And now, these are just kind of some articles at the time that were admitting some of the stuff that we were saying, and I put them at the time into this presentation. I'm trying to fast forward. And also, this is also another from The Guardian, Morgan Tsvangirai, who just passed away a few months ago, actually. He's the head of the Movement for Democratic Change. He died of cancer. But all the way back this time, he was actually, and I actually saw this video, but they took it down. It was off the internet so quickly, I couldn't find it anymore after a while, where he's discussing with these people who were posing as, I don't know who they were posing as. They were posing as, I guess, he thought he was talking to FBI or something like that, and they were actually ended up being some type of other private investigation firm or something like that. He was talking about how to assassinate Mugabe, And so now this is, the United States is supporting this person in their, and also, so I'm jumping around. Also, violence, when you say Mugabe is the problem kind of thing, oh, he's a dictator, he's violent, he's this and that. One of the things, I think I'm going to wrap it up real quick because I want to hear people's questions and engage that way, is that they organize violence and provocateur type actions. This is a van they bombed, the opposition MDC. They would do things like go to rallies and they would go to MCDC rallies and wear ZANU-PF regalia and then just kind of provoke things and do something, and then say that there was ZANU-PF and different things like that. Here is the violence of the government. Now, Trudy Stevenson is actually an MDC person. I don't have the media thing here, but she was attacked. But they would also have these intense conflicts with each other, about disagreements with each other, and they would resort to violence with each other. And so, and then here they bombed a bus. All these kind of things are happening. I remember that there was this time that this incident happened. I don't have it in here, where there was a demonstration. They staged a demonstration. The government, there was so much destabilization that the government put a moratorium on demonstrations. They said you can't do demonstrations. So they, of course, that was green light for them to go ahead and stage a demonstration. And they came and they staged this demonstration. The police came. The police in Zimbabwe don't carry guns, incidentally. So they're like unarmed generally. And then they came and they tried to do something with this demonstration, and it got physical. And a police officer did have a gun. They got physical. They attacked the police, and then one of the police shot and killed somebody with a handgun. It was all over the news. This Mobby cracked down on this demonstration, and somebody killed, and they don't give any context. And then what's very telling is in Guinea, they were peacefully demonstrating against what was happening in Guinea, Conakry. I think it was Conakry, Guinea. And the Conakry government, supported by the Western forces, come in and spray a demonstration with machine gun fire and kill all these people. It's this happening at the same time in the news, and you only hear about the lies that they're telling about the Zimbabwe particular incident. You don't hear anything about what's happening, and this is the police. They don't tell that these police were being attacked in these demonstrations in Zimbabwe. Not just demonstrations, just being attacked in general. They were on this rampage of doing these different things, and this is in the run up to the elections. Now, most people would say, well, this is not a good environment to have elections, these kind of things, and it's not. But I think they were under so much political pressure internationally, and they were weighing such on the propaganda that they felt like they needed to just go ahead with these elections, and because otherwise they would be accused of Mugabe's trying to stay in power kind of thing and all that kind of stuff. These are just diplomats above the right. I'm just showing. These are just photos that show how much the Western powers are in Zimbabwe. Actually, this is almost it. I recommend this book. This is a friend of mine too. I met actually and it's interesting how we met because around the time 2004, 2005, the Ujima Youth Farming Project, which I was serving as the U.S. liaison to help with this farming cooperative, reached out, and I was hearing all this stuff about Zimbabwe. I hadn't been paying attention, around that time, but I was doing Cuba stuff, and all this propaganda stuff made me say, wait a minute, that sounds a whole lot like, if they're slandering it like this, they must be doing something good. I got to find out what it is. So I was looking around this time. This is the kind of the not too long before being exposed to like the internet and there's websites and everything like that. So I tried to look for stuff that was going to give me the same type of smoking gun that I was able to already have when it came to Cuba stuff. And I found this website, swans.com, and Greg's articles were on there. And there it was. He laid it out as a meticulous researcher, a very good analyzer. And then this is his book. In this book, Strange Liberators, it says you might not be able to see the subtitle, Militarism, Mayhem, and the Pursuit of Profit. And that's what his name is. And he actually deals not just with Zimbabwe, he deals with North Korea, Zimbabwe, Yugoslavia, Iraq, and I think there's something else in this book. Really good. And he's really, and now the book is pretty old. Every time I mention it, he said, well, it's not new, but still, I still recommend it. He's really good. And then this is more recent. No, this is 2010, but actually it's come up. So when we hear about Zimbabwe now, we're hearing, during the whole time, they will always say, like Anna was saying, oh, they can't manage, the land, all this kind of stuff. Then in 2010, this guy Ian Scoons, who's in the Sussex University Institute of Institute of Development Studies in Sussex, had been working on a book or a study, does all these studies, and then came out with this book that pretty much disproves that the land reform that Zimbabwe carried out was not successful. And he has a number of myths that he unpacks there. This is a little like 7-minute interview that's on this page. I kind of just took a screenshot of it, but this is a page, Zimbabwe's land reform, and he actually has a book, and he goes through how it's actually one of the most progressive. I don't know if it's like the most progressive land reform in the world, not just in Africa, in the world, and there's a whole lot to the land reform. And so while they're giving this propaganda that it's this and only Mugabe's cronies, got the land, all this kind of stuff, there's actually not that's happening. Something else is happening. They were even, while certain things like imperialism measures things by how much export, that's another thing, what's it called, GDP, the gross domestic product, and how much you export, how much your people buy, the buying power and all that kind of stuff in the country and also how much you export, which is really the most capitalist measure. And don't tell what are other things, like what are your health indices and all that kind of other stuff. So anyway, one of the things that the land reform did was enable farmers and families to grow for themselves, to be self-sustaining, to not have to buy certain things outside or import certain things. And so while that's not going to show up on the type of measurements that capitalism has us looking at when it tries to measure economies, it's something that's actually quite beneficial for the people. And it doesn't. And he came out with a number of things here, and I list at least the 5 myths in one of my articles. I think it's the second one, Western imperialism and whatnot. And that was, I'm not going to do that. That's that's a link to the little audio that was embedded in that page. Flake and this is like the amendment to the Zimbabwe. They're actually amending the Zimbabwe Economic Development and Recovery Act now because they realize that we're having we're gaining some traction. Now we have to do something that will lift the sanctions. But I believe, and this is how that if it wasn't for, I suspect, if it wasn't for the Trump administration, that they would more easily just like turn over, the sanctions, like more easily switch and just be like, okay, more shamelessly switch. But I think, you have more skeptical type forces to say, well, you got to jump through more hoops than you've already been jumping through, so they make the semblance of some other kind of stuff, and they're all quite hypocritical. So anyway, I think I'm going to stop it there. So some of the things, these are a couple last things. In this last whole lot, so there's been some splits there that the U.S. imperialism took advantage of. It's unclear to me the nature of, there was this faction called the G40 faction, which was the youth of ZANU-PF more. They're considered the people that meant like people who are 40 and under, kind of youth, led by, or they said more loyal to, like, what they call Grace Mugabe, and in fact, they really, I know that the media overplays the importance of Grace Mugabe. They make it seem like she's a bad black woman, she just wants power and all that. She's really, that's subterfuge. And so, so when you talk, I've seen interviews with Grace Mugabe and even Mugabe, and what she's saying is, one, she doesn't have any intention of running, but, and then maybe because the media can make it overemphasize something, just play one thing, leave all the rest out, all that. But people, if in terms of it, a right to run and how the country is, she has a right to run. Just like anybody else. So, but they make it seem like it's some, they use it to distract people. And so, anyway, this split happened, and evidently, and this is what I suspect, that the president now, after they took power through, and I can answer more questions about the details of it if you want, but I think what's most important is the imperialism is getting what they want now. One of the things that they used to say, and Mugabe would say, is that we will never be a colony again. And I was assuming that also means not a neo-colony, not a colony that's with all the trappings of independence, but directed from outside. That was the assertion. But unfortunately, all stakes and purposes, if you look at what's happening now, selling off the airfield, selling off the airways, their airline, selling off the railways, and all kind of stuff, and all kind of minerals are up for grabs, and all these abiding by economic structure and adjustment programs from the IMF and World Bank. This is reversed. This is pretty much what Nkrumah describes in his book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. He describes what neocolonialism is in detail, and these are the things that he's describing, these types of relationships. And so it would seem that even Emerson Mnangagwa has a long way, I don't want to talk about it. I don't even like to do what imperialism does. I'm actually falling into the same trap I try to talk against. Individualism. Individualism, a lot of people think it's just like, individualism, when people are operating, they do things that for their own selfish needs or anything, that's not really it. That might be a form of individualism. To me, individualism, not just to me, individualism is the overimportance of individuals and making change. So you can even be altruistic in your intentions and everything, but you don't, or people don't. And you can even be selfless for yourself, but be dependent on an individual or leaders or something, and that's individualism. The overemphasis of individuals in the scope of things, when actually what's more important is the collective and all the dynamics that come along with that, and the politics that come along with that. So I'm going to stay away from talking about that, but I want to say that it's had to be true, and it's not only that. We know from Chester Crock and all these statements and the WikiLeaks cables that imperialism has been laying the groundwork for this. They could not just openly go in and invade and overthrow. And that Zimbabwe, out being a settler colony and all that, they weren't trying to awaken the Pan-Africanism, and those of us in the diaspora say, you can't do that to a black, nation that has all these racist settlers in there. So they had to do it this way. And so, and it goes even before, I think it would have to, they've had, their influences and laying their groundwork has to even go before 1990, 1998, all the way back to after the revolution. I can't, 1980. In between that time, they've always been doing everything they can to see which ways they can play this chess game to their favor. And it looks like at this moment, we're in check.
Oh, I just want to note that it's, we had scheduled from 6:30 to 8. I just want to make sure that we stay within that. So are you going into questions and answers
Yes.
and comments?
Sorry about that.
That's perfect. No, that's perfect time.
We know you always mean more. When you say 8 o'clock, that means 9.
Well, I didn't want to, be blatant about it, but,
Comments?
Good.
Observations?
I just wanted to mention something kind of local, connect who came to Virginia. His name was Tapson Mwere, and he
A lot of agricultural and land is a bit really, and that's another thing. It's a good question because in terms of why the UK and this was also one of the things that led to the Lanka House Accord was that the struggle in Zimbabwe at the time during the liberation struggle was very inspiring to people around the world, and as a result of the struggle and their winning in gains, it made like the people in South Africa, they were also engaged, and people don't see what's happening. The economic freedom fighters, the young, very formidable political party in South Africa, has called like kind of put the I don't want to say called their bluff, but I guess in a way forced the hand of the ANC and Ramaphosa by saying if you because they were saying they don't have enough votes in the parliament to the example they actually a lot of them could see some of the lies that we couldn't even see, and different all that kind of stuff. And so in that sense, that's what I would say to that, and that just like in most of all these frontline or these Southern Africa where land is a pressing issue, because of what happened in Zimbabwe, they're going to have a hard way to not address it in a more upfront way. Colonizers from somewhere else, and then you do it in somewhere else. But we are a colonized people because this is a settler colony, and anyone who's not part of that dominant settler class group of people is colonized. I mean, that's just the way it is. And so we have to, and being that means and it doesn't mean we're anti any people, let alone, but it does mean that we have, because of the historical developments over the world, how society has unfolded throughout time, it, in my view, able to do is the farming cooperatives. Now, we can't claim any kind of right to the land in the United States because it's a settler colony and there's other peoples. But if we're to work with all the oppressed people and we understand that land is not really used for the benefit of humanity and everything, and is used for a profit, then we have to be able to figure out how do we liberate areas and help us survive in a system, the settler colonial capitalist finance capital system, which cohesion amongst the Zimbabwean people is that people are not on the same page about what imperialism is. The movement for democratic change, which is largely, and this is another thing I didn't get into, I'm sorry, I'm going to wrap it up, is that one of the things they did when they just did this change of power, if people